menu override, and how would it help Wayland?
Okay. You'll notice at the federal level that there are bills that are put up by Congress and Senate that have to go through a presidential veto. And these bills are spending bills. And at the core of the bill, there could be a really good idea. But attached onto these bills are other things, and the term that's used is called pork barrel. And we know that pork barrel increases the size of the budget of the federal government. And every modern American president wanted something called a line item veto, the ability to separate the pork barrel from the basic underlying bill. Well, no president ever got that. But what's interesting is the state of Massachusetts actually gives every town the ability to have a line item veto, right, to its citizens. It gives it 3 different varieties of overrides. One is singular yes and no, which is what we've always had in Wayland. That's the lumped type, the type that the federal government always gets to see. The menu type is where the citizens get to actually choose between different items. They can select item A, item B, and so on. And there's a third type called pyramidal, and I won't get into that because it's a little bit complicated. I don't think it really applies to us. I wouldn't recommend pyramidal. But in menu, what you get to do is prioritize. And I guess what I want to say to you is that I think one of the jobs of a Board of Selectmen is to make priority decisions. That's called leadership, to make tough calls. So if you go out and you say that public safety, life and death services are more important than other things, then it's perfectly okay to separate public safety from everything else. Unfortunately, I have to say this bluntly, that what I've noticed in my tenure as a selectman is that the trend is that we would lump public safety in with everything else, so you don't get to have your ambulance service unless you go for the full multi-million-dollar override, and I call that override extortion or override coercion. I personally won't have it. If you elect me, that's what you should expect.
Alan, the Finance Committee has said that Wayland citizens should expect biannual, that is every other year, overrides for the foreseeable future. Why have they said that? And what is the impact on the community of having biannual overrides?
First, let's talk about the impact. Every override is a permanent increase in your tax. And it's compounded. So if I increase your taxes by 5%, and then I increase your taxes by 5% again, it's 1.05 squared. So you get more than a 5% increase the second time. So that impact, if it outpaces your ability, your income, your raises, your increase in cash flow in your own family, then you will have to continue to sacrifice and cut corners.
That's a compounding effect, isn't it?
That's a compounding effect, that's right. So the effect is that you will struggle more and more and more. And there are many people out there who are struggling. And you know who you are. And I'll bet I'm talking to most of you right now. And eventually at some point, there's a breaking point. You can't afford to maintain and sustain your lifestyle and maybe even your home in Wayland. And you have to leave. And I don't subscribe to the mentality that if you can't afford to keep up, then get out. I just don't believe that. I want to see a healthy town with all different age groups, which is what I said before. So that's part of the impact. Could you please give me the other part of the question?
The other part of the question, I think you answered the question.
Okay.
I think you've got. Well, I asked you why the Finance Committee is using biannual overrides.
All right. Yes, thank you. My first answer was a little long-winded, so let's get to the second part, okay? Basically, what has happened is our inability to be very strong with our labor unions have created contracts which, on the day they were signed, would guarantee overrides. Okay, that's just the way it is. And there's another contract negotiation coming up. Hopefully, we could do better on that one. So, if you sign contracts that guarantee overrides, guess what? You're going to get overrides. And the frequency at which that occurs is once every other year. We had one last year for $1.89 million. Now, the FinCom cannot precisely determine exactly what our expenditures are going to be and what our income is going to be in any given 12-month period, because there's some variables there. But it turns out, it's kind of ironic, that this year we had $1.1 million in extra cash, in free cash. And this year we transferred that $1.1 million from free cash back into the operational budget, taking our free cash from about 8% down to maybe 6.5%. And that avoided an override this year. So one way you could look at it is that the override last year was about $1 million too large. So did we have one last year and not one this year? Maybe you can look at it that we had one last year and this year. But we've put ourselves into a trap where our expenditures are such that we have to override at that frequency once every other year. Oh, by the way, 5 out of 7 is actually not 50%. So if you actually did have 1 out of 2, you'd be better than 5 out of 7.
Alan, if we don't pass overrides every other year, as the Finance Committee has recommended and expected, won't our AAA bond rating be hurt, and won't that be disastrous for the town's finances?
Moody's rates bonds the way investors see payers. So investors like to see that if we're going to have a lot of debt, that we're willing to come up with the cash. As long as we have overrides, then our bond rating will stay high, but our taxes will stay high. If we cut our services and don't do the overrides, Moody's will see it as a wash. So if there was a cut in bond rating, then the next tier down would not be AA, it would be from AAA to AA1. And that change in interest rate would be 2 basis points. 2 basis points is 2/100ths of 1%. I verified this with our treasurer, Wayland, Paul Keating, through the courtesy of Fred Turkington, our town administrator. It's 2 basis points. On $1 million borrowed, that's $200 in delta interest for the town of Wayland per year the first year. On a $50 million loan, that's 50 times that, or $10,000 in delta interest for the town. If there are 5,000 households in the town, 5,000 to 10,000 is $2. That would be $2 per household per year the first year. It would go down every year thereafter. So the question you have to ask yourself is, at that expense to get extra interest from AAA down to AA1 at being $2 per household, how much did it really cost us in those 5 overrides for 7 years to maintain the AAA? I submit to you that it was much more expensive to do the